Welcome back as we continue to adjust and readjust to the realities of the pandemic. A lot of parents are noticing big behavioral changes in their children. So here to give us some tools and some strategies to help out the little ones in our lives is youth and family therapist Tania DaSilva. Welcome back to the show, Tania.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, Tania, I want to dive right in because some parents might be watching us already panicking because they're seeing this regression in their child. So let's dive in because you say, listen, everybody, wait a second. It's totally normal. But what is it exactly? And why are we seeing it become so much more common during this pandemic?
So regression, simply put, is reverting to a younger state. So for a lot of kids, it happens when they're feeling stressed, when they're overwhelmed, when they're insecure about something, and when there's social, emotional, developmental, physical, or environmental changes. So the funny thing is that it is something we're hearing a lot more of whenever people are calling, but it's actually so normal and expected because COVID changed everything for kids, their environments, their social interactions, how they can, physically be close to someone. So it's definitely normal and expected.
So let's talk about some of the things that you're seeing. Like I've heard of stories from parents who say that their child who was formerly potty trained, starting to go back to diapers. I've heard about outbursts that are very uncharacteristic or they haven't seen in ages. So what are some other signs of this regression?
So the first thing is we always ask parents, are you seeing a behavioral or an emotional step back? And then that typically helps them start cluing into how they're seeing it. And you're right, it's toileting, it can be baby talk, it can be attachment when they were a little bit more independent. It can be even refusal to do things that they once did. We also see it in an increase in fears, tears, hyperactivity, aggression. So the way that it presents differs depending on the child, but it's definitely coming from a place of emotion. So they're struggling to adapt to the new norm. And I don't even mean the new norm in terms of COVID. It can be their new norm at their new middle school or in their new neighborhood that they just moved into. So definitely the number one thing you want to look for is, am I seeing behavioral or emotional steps back?
People are watching, they've got kids of all ages, Tania. So is regression more common at certain ages than others?
It's more obvious. And I always answer it that way because we work with kids 4 to 18. So we see a variety of ages. And I find with our younger ones, their emotions, their behaviors, they're just a lot bigger. So if your younger child starts regressing, you'll notice it more, right? Like the tears, all of a sudden they're not dressing themselves, they're ending up in your bed. With teens and preteens, it happens too, but it's a little bit more subtle. It might be, all of a sudden they don't want to go to the social interaction or engagement that they used to be super excited to go to, or even with returning to university. A lot of kids are starting to regress where they're like, you know what, I don't know if I want to go back on campus. So it definitely changes, but it is a lot more obvious in our younger kids.
For younger kids, a lot of times this regression can come out as anger and outbursts. And I think that, most parents will say like, it's just obvious that kids don't have a huge range at that age to express themselves. So how do we as parents best get them to address the real source of their anger for both of our sakes?
So this is one of the most popular questions that come up because our kids don't have emotional language yet, or they're developing that and their regulation. So the way that they communicate is in extremes. It's not uncommon that your child's going to come in and say that they hate you. And then like later on in the day, all of a sudden they're telling you that you're the best mom in the world, or, they want to die. And then all of a sudden it's the best day of their life. So kids communicate in extremes. So that's always our first point with parents is, yes, you're noticing the extreme language in the negative tone, but start paying attention to it in the positive. That instantly helps parents kind of calm down and feel less anxiety about what they're hearing. But then what I do is I actually lean into that language. So if the child is like, you know what, I hate you. I'm like, okay. So I'm like, what do you hate about me? What do you hate about what's happening? And as we do that, we typically get closer to what they actually hate. It can just be, I hate you because I had to leave the park earlier to come see you. Or even I want to die. This is one we hear a lot of, and I find it freaks parents out. And we jump into that one too, where I'll explain it in a way that it's like, okay, if you want to die, it means you want to end things. So what is it that you want to end? And sometimes it's literally that math lesson that they're just really struggling with. So lean into that. And lastly, we use this framework that parents love and kids actually pick up pretty quickly, but it's an iMessage. So we'll pop in their answers with them. So it starts with, I don't like it when you pop in what it is you don't like. It makes me feel, you pop in the feeling, and then I need, and you start brainstorming on what they need to calm themselves down or get through whatever they're struggling with.
Yeah, that's a great takeaway. I'm going to write that one down. You also say, Tania, that parents need to separate behaviors from emotion. What do you mean by that?
So as parents, whenever we see a behavior that we don't like, it can either be triggering us feeling embarrassed or shocked or disappointed, and we hyper focus on that behavior. The problem is that we actually ignore the emotion that's causing that behavior. So we do highlight the behavior we don't want to see, but then we try to refocus on the emotional needs of the child. So I might say something, and I have said this in office, where I'm like, you know what, I don't love that you just hit me, but I genuinely really like you, and I want to make sure that you feel good. So how can I help you feel better so that you're not throwing something at me? And that way we're highlighting the behavior we don't want to see, but then we're refocusing on what they actually need from us. So I find that to be really helpful.
Let's try to see beyond our current situation. There are a lot of parents who might be being like, you know what? There's short-term regression. Okay, fine. We're in a really weird time in our lives, but will there be long-term setbacks as a result of what is happening to kids? In other words, is there going to be long-term damage from what's happening right now with our children?
Yeah, well, and that's parents' biggest fear, right? Is this going to affect my child long term? Like, am I not supporting them? What's going on with them? So to be honest, it's case by case. Most kids, after about 2 weeks, have settled into their new routine and the regression is gone or at least disappearing. My kind of rule of thumb is if we're at the 2 week mark, we're going into the 3 week mark, or we've been seeing this for a month, then it's been around long enough that you still don't want to panic about it. Just because your child's regressing doesn't mean that they're going to have this horrible life. It just means that they